Welcome to Slight Reliability, learning SRE one day at a time. I'm Stephen Townsend. Welcome back to Slight Reliability. I'm Stephen Townsend, and this is the show where we learn about SRE and observability 1 week at a time. Today, we are talking about cognitive overload, observability fluency, and a whole bunch more. And joining me today is Paige Cruz, who is a senior developer advocate at Chronosphere. She's passionate about cultivating sustainable on-call practices and bringing folks their aha moment with observability. She started as a software engineer at New Relic before switching to site reliability engineering, holding the pager for InVision, Lightstep, and Weed Maps. Off the clock, you can find her spinning yarn, swooning over alpacas, or watching trash TV on Bravo. Hello, Paige. How are you?
Great. I'm doing really well today. And yes, I will talk about alpacas anytime, but that is a different podcast.
The only thing I know about alpacas is I heard they spit at you. Is that true?
Yes, the camelid family, they do tend to spit. We are too polite as SREs to do that. But, when you get frustrated, that's their way of blowing off steam.
So, Paige, why is observability important to you?
Oh, my gosh. For so many reasons. I think very practically, it has been the foundation of my career. I was reflecting lately on why am I on my third observability company? Why can't I just quit this niche? What is it that keeps bringing me back? And I really think it has to do with the power of democratizing data. And so when I think of observability, I think of really rich contextual system signals that you can ask whatever question you want. And I'm a very inquisitive person. And so for me, there's something that is so beautiful about troubleshooting in a system with high observability, that the rapid fire question, answer, zooming at a system level down to a container in a pod and back out again. And let's look at historical. There's something so magical about that experience. And it is not the experience I think a lot of people have today with their monitoring and observability tooling. And so since I've had a taste of working in these highly observable systems, I'm very keen on getting everybody to, I think in my bio, the aha moment. I want to bring everybody the joy I feel when I look at a page of, a summary page of metrics. And I want people to see that as a treasure box of goodies, not as this, boring part of their job or something that they have to go do because the bill got too high and now they need to actually look at this stuff. I think of your observability telemetry as a really, like I said, a big toy chest. Like I'm excited to play with the data, ask the questions, and explore. So it means a lot to me because one, it's been the foundation of my career. Like I just have spent a lot of time thinking about how to make this easier for folks. And because it's helped me on call. It helps my husband on call. It helps all of my friends who are on call. The more observable our systems are, the better they are for the humans in the loop who have to operate this stuff. Like, it is not a joke that we are on call and carry a pager. Like, it may be a cell phone, but like that's a very real responsibility that we should acknowledge.
One of the challenges, I think, particularly for roles like SRE, but pretty much any senior engineering role in the industry, is that cognitive load, the stuff that you need to keep in your mind to do your job effectively, is getting more and more difficult. There's more and more stuff to hold in there, and I talked about it on the show before, and you and I had a chat a couple of weeks ago around this concept of cognitive overload. So, do you think is it real? Is cognitive overload a real concern from your perspective before we even go further into it?
Absolutely. It can be as simple as thinking of how many clicks does it take for me to get to where I want to go or to get an insight or an answer. Kind of like if you've ever seen the Tootsie Pop commercials of the owl, it's a cartoon owl, and he's like, how many licks to the center of the Tootsie Pop? For me, I'm like, how many clicks until I can get to the frickin' signal and the answer that I'm looking for? Because if I have to go from tool A to tool B to back to tool A again, now that I have a bigger thread to pull on, like that stuff takes up a lot of brain space, and it also kind of upsets me as an observability practitioner.
I think it was in Team Topologies, one of the books I read recently, it talked about not just individual cognitive load, but also team cognitive load. And so I think there's an aspect of communicate, like there's only so much that a single team can collectively work on together before they get overloaded.
Yes.
And I think this is, I guess there's communication elements in there, and how that information is shared to sort of create the hive mind of knowledge.
Absolutely. And I think we've run into, when I started going to DevOps days and when I started my career about 6-7 years ago, I still was hearing about the stories of when ops threw it over the wall, or dev threw it over the wall to ops. Oh my God. And I'm like, okay, I don't think we ever moved on past that. The meme that I see now is, well, ops got fed up and then just shoved Kubernetes at the developers and said, oh, it's the platform. Now you deal with this complexity. Do you think that we're still having that tug of war of what the right line is between developers and SRE?
Absolutely. I totally agree. And then you push it back, it gets pushed back. Hey, here's a platform, here's Kubernetes or any platform, as a developer, now you can do it for yourself. And then developers are, but no, I don't want to deal with that. And it's the hard stuff. And I think there's something potentially intrinsically less satisfying and more complex about operational platform type work potentially, as opposed to development. Maybe there's a massive, bias or judgment call on my part.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know. I get the feeling that no one really wants to do ops, but it needs to be done. And it's the dev is the sort of, artistic one, and you get to sort of, be at the front, be the hero on the podium.
Yeah, it is. And I was warned before I really went heads down into the SRE path that it is unglamorous. It is not celebrated. It is, if the lights go off, yeah, we care. But if the power's on, nobody's applauding you for that. And earlier I was like, I don't need roses. I don't need accolades. But it wears on you year after year of having to hold all of this state of, you look around and you're like, well, gosh, my team is tasked with knowing the whole path from PR to production, not only every single environment that's there, the multiple clusters we have in production, but I also now need to know the CI/CD pipelines, and I have to help folks troubleshoot that. And oh, by the way, we never trained our developers on Kubernetes, so they're asking what a pod is. And you're like, whoa, you kind of hired me and you asked me all this Linux stuff, and now I'm finding out I'm a teacher, an advocate, an evangelist, all of these things. And I think that's where the cognitive overload really comes into place for the team boundary is, what are you really expecting your SREs to know? And was that different than what you interviewed them for? Has it evolved as your platform or product that you're selling has evolved and the architecture's evolved? I tend to call that kitchen sink SRE, where you're just kind of that junk drawer where you can find a spatula, a whisk, temperature thermometer. Like, we're kind of the Swiss Army knives of a department. And that is an exhausting role to play.
Have you in your career had experiences of cognitive overload or something close?
Yeah, I think for me, it comes down to not knowing the why. So I can think of one system that I was trying to onboard myself to, and there were 3 proxies on the path from edge to container. And I just could not understand. Well, I think one was a reverse proxy. And of course, there were reasons. But what I kept getting told is, oh, we don't need them anymore. We don't need them anymore. Don't worry about that. You don't need to think about that. And I'm like, but I do, because when something goes wrong and I don't know what happens from A to B and the handoffs from C to D, that makes my life really complicated. And why aren't we simplifying this? If we don't need this, please let's delete it. I love a deprecation project. And so what ended up happening was I did have to investigate an incident that was due to me being unfamiliar with one of the 3 proxies. I knew about the other 2, had accounted for them in my testing. And then that 3rd one was a surprise to me. And that's what actually ended up causing an issue. And so I'm pretty good about not putting blame on myself and not letting others kind of play the blame game. But I did think it spoke to, if I couldn't understand this, and this passed PR checks on my team and my sister team on the infra side, how could we expect an engineer to understand this stuff, or if we want them to self-serve, that was a really a foot gun. It was too easy to shoot yourself in the foot. And so that was a time that it was very real to me, that the cognitive overload of just understanding how a request traveled through our system, when that is a complex story, woof, it's time to either chop out some of those proxies, or for me, again, like, get to the why. If I know why something's there, even if it's an unsatisfactory answer, it sticks in my mental model. But just to have people say, oh, that's not important over and over, my brain started writing that stuff off. How about you? Does that resonate of the multiple proxies?
I have a feeling we've had a slightly different sort of career trajectory, that most of my work has been for sort of complicated enterprise and government rather than.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I remember a few years ago working for a large, really important program of work where what was being delivered by, say, a dozen engineering teams, and the solution was extremely complicated and very coupled. So each component depended very much on other components, and it had to be developed in synchronous, in a synchronous fashion.
Okay.
And nobody understood the whole thing. I mean, I was one of the few roles that were looking at the whole thing end to end, but even then my brain was breaking, and that, happened to be about the time that I burned out. So I can see,
gosh.
I could see in enterprise, in that sort of enterprise world, that's a common situation, like a really big complex solution and a program to work on it, and just no one can hold it all in their brain, or no team can even hold it all in their brain.
Yeah. And would it have helped in that situation? Do you think it would help for leadership to say, hey, we don't expect that you can hold all of this state in your head? To me, it's the making those expectations explicit, because if no one's telling me, if people are not telling me the bounds of what my team owns, it feels like SRE has to just fill in the gaps. And so implicitly, it feels like people are saying, well, none of the devs know the full end-to-end picture. You better know that end-to-end picture. We need somebody. Would that have helped changing the expectations? Or was the nature of your role such that you did kind of need that overarching view?
I think that the challenge there was that leadership believed that these different teams could work independently. But the reality of the situation was that the problem statement, the challenge we're trying to beat, hadn't been broken up into small enough chunks that they could be worked independently. So there was a conflict there between, this is the expectation, this is the reality.
Yes. And I think a lot of folks find themselves in that position, surprisingly, with microservices. I remember when we were all breaking up the monolith, going to microservices, and I gave this talk, microservices means macro communication. I totally made up that word, and macro communication means nothing. It just sounded nice. But the whole gist of it was, look at, the monolith was nice. You had engineers that understood one stack, one framework. Was it messy to share responsibilities? Sure. But now that we've got this constellation of microservices, I have so many different teams that I have to talk to get an API point like updated or deprecated. And like the human to human or team to team communication then becomes super important, which is ironic because everyone moved to microservices for that. Pick your own stack, go at the speed you want to, be this little isolated unit, do one thing well. And I'm like, we kind of didn't fulfill that vision, in my opinion.
More communication doesn't mean better communication as well. So because if you don't create formal communication channels between the teams or the people, the stakeholders that need to talk to each other, then informal ones get created, and you won't even know. I think maybe it's as a leader, you won't necessarily see all this chatter which is going on in the background, which is actually draining everyone and causing confusion.
Oh, absolutely. And the one thing I'll say is that's where instant messaging, that probably burned me out the most as an SRE was once instant messaging came into the game and people thought, okay, I can do help desk through here, or the SREs are just instant message away. The quality of questions kind of really started to go down. And And that adds to cognitive overload. If I'm answering the same 101 level questions over and over, and the organization isn't going to support me by training folks or saying, hey, we expect that you know XYZ walking in the door, that's another form of cognitive overload for me, of just that repetitive answering questions that are valid. I always want to help a developer. I would always drop what I'm doing to help a human out. But again, it gets fatiguing and it gets overwhelming after a period of time.
Bit of a side note there. We had the same thought in my previous role, and I think they're still working on it now, an internal Stack Overflow type system where any question which gets asked more than once, you put, or you post the question there and then the answer's there forever.
Yes.
I don't know. Have you ever seen that before internally?
Yeah, we at Chronosphere use Stack Overflow for Teams, which I am. So Stack Overflow was like, oh, brilliant. We've already got all the devs coming to us. Let's, turn this around. I've also used Confluence Knowledge Base, whatever durable, I don't care what tech it is, whatever durable knowledge store you have, that is such a rich source of onboarding and the quick answers that you think an instant messaging tool will get you. Actually, you're much better served by a big knowledge base that's been built on year over year.
I haven't been on call much / at all. You have. Tell me about alert fatigue.
Oh my gosh. So I've been doing some interesting. Let me back up. Personally, being on call a lot because I worked at small to mid-stage startups. So the SRE team was tiny but mighty, and again was that kitchen sink SRE. We did IT, we did security, we dabbled in a lot. I would say being on a small on-call rotation was one of the primary factors that I personally burned out. And I would talk to people on my team about it, and they'd say, well, the pager doesn't really go off. And I'm like, yeah, but it always could. And that's what my brain would hold on to is, well, it always could go off. You don't know what's going to happen. And because of my kind of knowledge area with observability, I know how much of the system's, not instrumented. I maybe don't know when and where we need to go, but I know that I would have some sort of confidence level in the quality of alerts and how much of the system we had visibility into. And oftentimes it was not super high quality alerts, bad signal to noise, and knowing that there were some gaps in the monitoring, or that because I was an SRE and would need to troubleshoot app level stuff, I would be going into other teams' dashboards that have their own idea about how things should be set up, don't have maybe the nicest naming of charts, like the chart names would all be the metric names. And I'm like, that doesn't tell me what is happening to the customers right now. And that's what I care about, because I'm in mitigation mode. I'm not in fix it. I'm not in, actually fix it for real mode. I'm in stop the bleeding. So that drain of constantly being on call for a system that it wasn't even trust but verify with the alerts. It was verify then trust. It was spending cycles to see, should this alert have fired? When was the last time someone touched this? What's the history of this alert? Can I see if the last time anyone acted this alert that they actually did something, and what was it that they did? I'd do a whole mini investigation before even getting to the actual signal that triggered the threshold to see if there was a real problem. And that alert fatigue over time really, you just become desensitized to the noise. And that's a very scary place to be. It's very scary to have a new engineer join and say, oh my God, how are you looking at all these alerts? And you go, I physically cannot. I am one human. I know that there's stuff in there that is probably a simmering fire, but it is so lost in low quality signals, I'm so tired. I've been doing this a long time. You'll get to this jaded spot. That's not fun. It's not even that it's not fun. It doesn't feel responsible. And so that alert fatigue is something that I really caution people to look out for in their organization. It could be a particular team that is snowed under with alerts. It could be a particular part of the platform. Maybe your company acquired somebody and they're having trouble integrating to your holistic monitoring strategy. Whatever it is, whether it's the whole system or parts of the system, I think that's tackling alert fatigue is probably the best thing you could do for addressing the cognitive overload up front. So yeah, I don't can't say that I recommend on call. I mean, I do your homework before you join an org.
I feel like there's a whole other episode on just on alert fatigue and how to set up your alerts in a way that is effective. And yeah,
there's a great book, Effective Monitoring and Alerting for Web Operations. It's an old O'Reilly book, but it focuses mostly on the concepts, not on a particular tech stack. That is the one I recommend folks go to.
In preparation for this discussion, we were thinking about examples of situations which might lead to cognitive overload in the wider sense. And so I had a few ideas. One of them is having unfocused teams. So if you're in a team and the purpose of your team isn't clear. So Team Topologies by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Buys, it illustrates this beautifully. I think that teams should either be like a stream-aligned team or like a product team, right? Or they should be like an enablement team, which is enabling those other teams, or they're like a platform team who runs the stuff that helps other developers do their work, or maybe they're a complex subsystem team who runs this really complex, weird thing on the side. Yeah, anything beyond that is kind of ineffective. And if you're trying to do 2 or 3 of those things at once, it gets overwhelming because you don't have enough focus. I think that's one thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that one.
Another one is having an over-reliance on sort of senior principal staff engineers who have all the knowledge and capability, and it's trying to get that knowledge and capability out and spread it around the organization. But if you don't, then of course those individuals become a bottleneck. Their lives become very difficult.
Yes, and I'm so curious about what, as an industry, what do we think we're doing for the next generation of operators? We should be raising them up and training them. A lot of the ops folks I know have been like, well, I learned the hard way. And, back then I took out a whole rack and it never did that again. I'm like, gosh, we've got to move past this. Everybody's in it for, you're on your own learning journey and it's probably going to be awful. And by the time you're 10 years into the business, you'll have seen everything, you'll have helmed these incidents, and then you'll be this kind of magical senior engineer who can respond instantly and know what's going on. I think we've definitely got to do better than that. And you're right that it is about that knowledge sharing. How do we translate those years of seasoned experience into bite-sized lessons that are relatable and useful for people in their day-to-day? I don't know, because you mentioned not a lot of folks want to do operations. When did you feel that you had gotten your ops chops?
I don't think I ever got them, really. I did like 13 years in performance engineering. So I was working in the delivery space. I was dabbling in sort of monitoring of production. And I wanted to get involved in that space because of the experience of like, I'm doing all this stuff up front, but actually, does it even mimic the real world? What's actually happening in the real world? That's where the value is. I want to work in that space. So that's a very different, different journey. I don't know if I have my chops yet because I haven't been on call for a complex system. And I think that's kind of the rite of passage.
Yeah, I even had a moment where I was like, I don't know if I'm an operations engineer. And my friend was like, yeah, I've watched what you've been doing. Like, you most certainly are. And maybe that speaks to sort of the never-ending learning journey that we're on in tech is when is it enough knowledge? When are you seasoned or senior or principal or, I don't have good answers. I just know I've seen some things and I've learned some lessons.
So I think another situation which lends itself to cognitive overload is not having an organization who doesn't have priority or budget for operational work or improvement work, and it's not part of the culture. As soon as that happens, then I think you inevitably end up with this massively growing tech debt, fighting fires constantly, and then everyone's under the pump. And how can you move on from that point? Because it's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse.
Absolutely. The toil that some people put up with. I eventually started to tell everyone when I was an SRE, if you are doing a manual task or operation on a somewhat regular cadence, please come talk to me. Like, I'm happy to automate that for you. I do not want engineers clicking. Again, how many clicks does it take? I don't want engineers clicking 5 different things to just get something out the door or check on and deploy. The budget for priority improvement or simplification work, I shorthand that to gardening. We used to call it gardening work because It's what the engineers like to do. We feel good taking care of and maintaining our systems, but it doesn't necessarily, it's hard to argue that we should upgrade the database because we always want to stay too behind the latest when the other chunk of work is delivering a new feature. That's always a really difficult debate to get around. But like you said, it has to be a part of the culture to do this gardening work. It's not something you can continue to push off year after year. It's definitely something that should be a part of your on-call. I personally don't think on-call should take sprint points ever. That really is your time to dedicate to fixing the system. But that is a really hard battle to win.
I think if anything in the moment, there's a lot of tech companies, big tech companies are laying people off. And it's kind of supporting this idea that I think a lot of companies really just care. I mean, leadership, very high leadership cares about making money for shareholders. And a lot of this other stuff doesn't seem to matter as much. I think it's crazy. I think it's bad.
It's wild. It's such a short-term view to take on something that I think should be given the medium to long-term view. Whether or not the system that you have or the product or platform you're selling you love today, there's certainly nuggets and pockets of brilliance in there that could be a business pivot. You know, I don't think it's fair to let these beautiful systems just wither and rot away. We've got to put in some basic maintenance.
I think something else which adds, mental complexity is it's the architectures of the systems that we work in. And some architectures are better, more conducive to mental health than others. So I think tightly coupled architectures, which also based on Conway's law means tightly coupled teams, makes things really difficult, more communication, more complexity, more needing to orchestrate things, not doing the work up front, like I said before, to take a complex problem and break it up effectively into smaller problems which a single team can own and manage themselves and operate themselves. And that's a lot. It's hard work, but if you do that work up front, I think it makes a big difference.
I have not yet worked at a place that has done the domain-driven design. I'm not sure if you've heard of that book or philosophy, but it was really about, the gist as I understand it was break down your architecture into like logical business domains and get everyone in a certain domain using the same language, whether they're the product manager, a support engineer, a SRE, a software engineer. Having people use the same language to talk about the same things is actually a surprisingly difficult thing to do in tech when we've overloaded every word under the sun. And so I would love to work at a company that has done that. I think in monitoring, I kind of know my way around. I know our customers, I kind of know the basic use cases. But for something like e-commerce or like even streaming platforms, it would do you a lot of good to sit down and figure out the domains at the start.
And the interesting thing is that as engineers, I don't think, we don't have the skills alone to do that. It needs to be a full, organization thing. So what's the fix? What's the antidote to to cognitive overload?
How do we solve this for everyone?
Yeah. Solve the problem for everyone, Paige. Where you go?
Yeah. That's why they pay me the big bucks. I think there needs to be a recognition that there is this problem. I think if you go right into solution mode, you're missing the human part, that you have humans that are cognitively overloaded. They're maxed out on RAM. Working in these systems is taxing and draining. So you have to acknowledge and give some space for the feelings and the, oh my God, finally, we're going to work on this. You're going to have some salty people. It's kind of how it is in ops. We put up with a lot. And so I wouldn't be surprised if people are a little crunchy. But once you have that sort of debrief, then let's start to look at focusing our teams. What is a sane boundary for your SRE team or central observability team? They can't do everything. They absolutely can't. And so the best thing you can do is say, this is what's not in scope, or this is an unowned shared piece of our infrastructure that needs investment. I would love if SRE could give up responsibility. I don't know about you. It would have been nice to say, hey, our plate's not big enough for that.
I've already mentioned coupled architectures and complex architectures. I think, like we said, having decoupled architectures where large complex problems are broken up. If you can get to the point where a team of 6 to 9 people can independently, completely own a service end to end, almost completely. There's always going to be exceptions. That's a good place to be, I think.
Yes, and even in that system where you have the independent teams, if I was CTO, if I was CTO for a day, I would do the team API model. Every team is going to have, we have the namespace IM channels. It'll be team whatever. It will change as we reorg. I want to have weekly office hours. I want to know that I can talk to someone on that team, a real human, about a legitimate issue, and not go through who's on this team, where do they live, why is their Slack channel named the Lobsters? Like, what? I just, to be able to answer who owns what and how can I get a hold of a human for a conversation, if you can figure that out for your org and standardize that, oh my God, you're lowering cognitive overhead already. I don't have to go on a whole quest to find out my point of contact.
So I've had Sebastian Feets on the podcast before. He's talked about, he thinks there's different pillars of SRE. I've interpreted that in my own way, which is, well, I think that there will be a handful of like super geniuses in the world who can be an experts in literally every part of SRE. Most of us are mortal and can't do that. So I think that, I'm not saying you won't work on all aspects of it, but I think that people can say, sort of be owners of a certain area or focus on it for a period of time. And I think that helps potentially with cognitive overload. What do you think?
Yeah. Like, I would love, if I were setting up an SRE team, to do initiatives or programs. I love the idea of, hey, we are going to tighten up our incident management. And this time we're focusing on how customer success can get involved and do status page template updates so that anybody can put out updates that are approved by corporate. Like, that is wonderful. Clear beginning, clear end. You've got something you can measure going forward. And if you're interrupted in the course of doing that work, say a huge fire that rises up with the observability bill that you've got to go put out, and you're the only team that can do it, you really have something to show the business, hey, for my time, we had option A, incident, improving our incident response, and option B, putting out this fire. Look at where I spent my time. Is that really, at the end of the day, how we wanted to use this very expensive team? Probably not. But you've got to make that work. You've got to make those trade-offs so visible. SRE should just be communications engineer, honestly. It feels like we're very much the conduit for a lot of interesting system conversations.
That is a trend. I don't know what it's like across the industry, but the organizations I've worked at recently, you would have a very small number of high-level engineers, like maybe 2 or 3 people who would know enough context to see the full picture, and very little of that across the organization. And it's challenging.
It is challenging. And those kind of superhero SREs that you've talked about, I've totally worked with some in my day. And when I think about the factors, how could I be that person when I grow up? Well, part of it is some of them had 20, 25 years under their belt. Some of them had built the internet. Like, of course, over time, you're going to habituate and learn like the nuances of a system where you see a spiky graph and you're like, oh, I know what's going on there because we can grok this stuff better over time. The other part of it is, what other systems have you been exposed to? Have you been exposed to systems on bare metal where you had to provision everything yourself and care about the security? Or are you, like me, a baby born in the cloud who doesn't think about, I literally don't think about the power supply to the building because, hey, that's Amazon's problem. That's Google's problem. So that's the other part, is how in the senior architect SRE sharing their knowledge, find those differences in your path and another SRE's path. And that can help you build those bridges of understanding of, why do we do this? Or why is this important? Or how did you know to telnet or whatever? That's a horrible example, but how did you know to put in that query to get the answer? I always ask those questions that get those experts making their internal thinking explicit out loud.
You you were talking before about that sort of priority call based on we're working on this initiative. We had to fight a fire. Is that a good use of our time? What do you think? I mean, I know that there are organizations that say you will spend 20% of your time or one day a week or whatever doing improvement work. I think it's, you say that and then it doesn't make any difference because people will just go and fight a fire if there's a fire.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch more that needs to go with it, around the culture and honoring it and saying, you really need to honor this time because it's really important. And that has to come from the top.
It does have to come from the top. Like, that's the part about SRE. If I were to say, like, let's just not do this anymore, is, quote, influence without authority. I'm sorry. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm happy to see these observability aha moments, but just because I teach so-and-so engineer how to emit metrics or how to add labels, that doesn't mean they're going to go do this for every PR if their boss isn't telling them, making them aware, championing better observability. Yeah, I mean, totally. I feel like we're describing SRE as this like Sisyphusian task of just rolling the boulder up the hill and then watching it fall and being like, all right, another day, another boulder.
Well, I think it can be. It depends on the context, right?
Yeah, totally.
I think the last thing I thought about is she came from my previous boss, Stephen Gill, who's been on the show before. He was a big fan of stop starting new things and finish the things you started before. Even if a new thing comes along, which seems super important, just finish what you did. So you've got, it's good psychologically to say, we finished this thing and you can move on and you can open up that mental space for a new thing and probably do a better job at it.
Oh, totally agree. And the Jira hack that one of my team's managers did is they put a limit on how many tickets we could have open in work in progress. And it would light up, that column would light up red as soon as someone dragged in I think it was 1 or 2 tickets per person. So you could kind of ping pong between two things. So once we got the 8th ticket, that column lit up red and it was like, whoa, why is so much going on? Let's talk about this. Why did you think it was important to bring this in? And yeah, I co-signed this one. Agree. Any
other thoughts on and the antidote or the cure for cognitive overload?
With respect to the senior architect superhero, the person that you always go to because you know that they will get you the answers you need quickly, while they have all of the knowledge, they're not always able to teach. Like, teaching and mentoring is a totally separate skill than being an amazing firefighter. And so those folks may need a little bit of guidance on how to get somebody from 0 to, I understand logs, or 0 to, okay, I can troubleshoot this bug on my own because I've learned PromQL or whatever it is. But you can't expect that those people are naturally just going to be these wonderful teachers, because that's not really what's gotten them far, so far in their careers. So I think treasure those people, appreciate them, start to take the load off of their shoulders, and help them.
Thank you so much, Paige, for coming on the show today. We're going to continue this discussion next week because there is so much more to talk about. Anything else you wanted to talk about before we sign off today? Any words of wisdom?
Let's start National Appreciate Your SRE Day, January 24th. We're calling it.
It's the 25th here. I missed it. Damn it.
Oh, dang it.
So that's all for another episode of Site Reliability. Paige and I will see you next week. Have a good one.